Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a world completely covered in ice? Imagine stepping outside and seeing endless white fields, glaciers as tall as mountains, and giant creatures like mammoths walking across the frozen ground. This wasn't a movie or a fantasy. It was real. For thousands of years, the Earth was locked in an ice age, a time so harsh that survival itself felt like a miracle. But here's the question: what caused it? Why did our planet suddenly freeze, and how did people and animals manage to survive? Tonight, we'll travel back in time to uncover the secrets of the Ice Age. We'll explore the science, the stories, and the incredible resilience of life during one of the coldest chapters in history. So, get comfortable, close your eyes if you like, and let's step together into the frozen world of the past. The thought of a frozen world has always stirred the human imagination. When people hear the words Ice Age, they often picture endless snow, mammoths marching across white fields, and humans huddled around fires, wrapped in furs as icy winds swept across the land. It is both a chilling and fascinating vision, one that feels almost unreal. After all, today most of us live in a world where the seasons change predictably, where summers are warm and winters, though sometimes harsh, always pass. But there was a time when cold ruled the earth, not for a single season, but for thousands upon thousands of years. The Ice Age was not a simple winter, and it was not just one event. It was a long chapter in Earth's history that shaped the landscapes we walk on today and influenced the story of humanity itself. Imagine walking outside and seeing not just snow covering the ground, but walls of ice taller than buildings, stretching for miles in every direction. Great glaciers carved valleys and pressed against forests, grinding down mountains and leaving behind marks that can still be seen today. Rivers froze, entire regions became uninhabitable, and animals had to adapt or disappear. The world was colder, harsher, and more demanding than we can easily picture from our modern lives. It is almost like imagining another planet, one familiar but strange, where survival was not guaranteed and every day tested the strength of life itself. Part of the fascination with the Ice Age comes from the animals that walked the earth during that time. It is hard not to be intrigued by creatures like the woolly mammoth, with its shaggy coat and curling tusks, or the saber-toothed cat, with its long fangs and powerful build. These animals lived in a world shaped by cold and scarcity, yet they thrived for a time, becoming symbols of strength and resilience. When we see their bones in museums, we can almost feel a connection to that frozen world, as if we are peering through a window into a time when giants roamed and nature looked very different. Humans, too, lived in this age. Our ancestors shared the earth with these incredible animals, learning to hunt them, to respect them, and to fear them. They made tools from bone and stone, built shelters from mammoth tusks and hides, and learned to use fire not just for warmth but for survival itself. To live in the Ice Age was to be constantly alert, constantly resourceful. For many of us today who live with heaters, grocery stores, and warm houses, it is almost unimaginable to think about life in such a world. Yet those early humans endured, and in doing so, they carried their stories, skills, and resilience into the future that led to us. But the Ice Age is not only interesting because of the creatures and humans who lived during it. It also fascinates people because it raises questions about the Earth itself. Why did the world become so cold? What forces could cover half a continent in ice, and why did it last so long? Scientists have studied rocks, fossils, and the very layers of the Earth to answer these questions, and in doing so they have uncovered a story of shifting climates, moving oceans, and delicate balances that can change the face of the world. The Ice Age reminds us that the planet is not fixed and unchanging. It breathes, it shifts, it transforms in ways that humans cannot always predict. This sense of mystery, of a world that is at once familiar and alien, is what keeps people fascinated even today. The Ice Age also captures the imagination because of its sense of drama. The very phrase conjures images of struggle, animals pushing through snow, hunters tracking prey across frozen plains, glaciers creaking as they move slowly but unstoppably across the land. There is a sense of tension, of something vast and powerful pressing down on life. And yet, it is not only a story of hardship, it is also a story of survival, of adaptation, of life finding ways to endure even in the coldest of times. That balance between danger and resilience makes the Ice Age feel almost like an epic tale, one written not by humans but by the Earth itself. Even the landscapes around us today carry reminders of that frozen past. The Great Lakes in North America were carved by glaciers. Valleys in Europe were shaped by rivers of ice that flowed long before humans built cities there. Moraines, those ridges of rock and soil left behind by retreating glaciers, mark where the ice once stood. To look at these features is to realize that the Ice Age is not just a story in books. It is written into the very shape of the ground beneath our feet. When people walk through these valleys or sail on these lakes, they are moving through places shaped by a world very different from our own. There is also a quiet wonder in realizing how long the Ice Age lasted. We often think in short spans of time, days, years, maybe decades. But the Ice Age stretched over tens of thousands of years, part of larger cycles that repeat across Earth's history. This sense of deep time, of an age measured not in human lives but in the slow rhythms of the planet, can feel humbling. It reminds us that our own world is only a moment in a much larger story, and that the Earth has been many different places before becoming what we know today. For some, the Ice Age is even a source of mystery and speculation. Did humans tell myths about the frozen world that we no longer understand? Did memories of the cold survive in stories passed down through generations? Some scholars wonder if ancient tales of floods, giants, or great hunts are echoes of life during the Ice Age. Whether or not that is true, the idea that we carry distant memories of those frozen days adds another layer of fascination. Perhaps what makes the Ice Age so endlessly interesting is the way it mixes fear and awe. It was a time when life was fragile, when the cold could kill, when survival required everything from ingenuity to sheer luck. But it was also a time of beauty, of vast frozen plains under starry skies, of mammoths moving in herds, of early humans gathering around fires that pushed back the endless night. It was a time when the Earth revealed both its harshness and its grandeur, and when life proved its ability to endure against overwhelming odds. As we look back at this frozen world, we find ourselves asking not just what happened, but also what it means for us today. The Ice Age shows us that change is constant, that climates shift, and that nature can transform the world in ways we cannot easily control. It also shows us that life is adaptable, that humans and animals alike can find ways to survive even when everything seems stacked against them. In that sense, the fascination with the Ice Age is not only about looking into the past, but also about understanding resilience, endurance, and the strength of life itself. The story of the Ice Age begins with cold, but it continues with survival. It begins with ice, but it ends with life pushing forward. That balance between destruction and persistence is what keeps the Ice Age alive in our imaginations. Even though the glaciers melted long ago, the memory of that frozen world still lingers, not only in rocks and bones, but in the way we continue to wonder about it. And as we settle into the story of how and why it happened, we begin to see that the Ice Age is not just history. It is a reminder of the power of the planet, the fragility of life, and the enduring spark of survival that carries us through even the coldest of times. When people hear the phrase Ice Age, it often brings to mind one single picture. A time long ago when the whole planet was covered in snow and glaciers stretched from pole to pole. But the truth is a little more complicated, and perhaps even more fascinating. The term Ice Age doesn't mean one frozen period that lasted endlessly. Instead, it describes times in Earth's history when the climate was much colder than today, and ice sheets spread across large parts of the land. In fact, Earth has gone through several ice ages over millions of years, not just one. Some lasted millions of years, others came and went in cycles, but all of them left their mark on the planet. So, what do scientists really mean when they say ice age? At its simplest, an ice age is a period when large ice sheets cover significant parts of Earth's surface. Today, we only see massive ice sheets in places like Greenland and Antarctica. But during the height of the most recent ice age, these frozen giants stretched much further. Ice reached into North America, covered much of northern Europe, and spread across Asia. Glaciers moved like slow rivers of ice, reshaping the land. But even during that time, not every place on Earth was buried in snow. There were still forests, grasslands, and deserts. The world was colder overall, but not frozen solid from top to bottom. Scientists also distinguish between something called a glacial period and an interglacial period. A glacial period is when the ice spreads widely, temperatures drop, and the planet feels locked in cold. An interglacial period, on the other hand, is a warmer stretch of time when the ice retreats and climates become milder. Right now, believe it or not, we are living in an interglacial period within a larger ice age cycle. That might sound surprising, because when we look outside, we don't see a frozen world. But technically, as long as we still have permanent ice sheets in places like Antarctica and Greenland, Earth is considered to be in an ice age, just not in its coldest stage. This means that the word ice age is both bigger and smaller than people often imagine. Bigger because it refers to a series of repeating cold phases that stretch across millions of years, and smaller because even during its peak, the whole planet was not one giant block of ice. Understanding this helps us see that Earth's climate has always been in motion, shifting slowly over time, warming and cooling in cycles that shape everything from the land to the life that survives upon it. The idea of an ice age first came into focus in the 1800s, when scientists noticed strange marks on the land. Huge boulders sat in places where they did not seem to belong. Valleys had shapes that suggested they were carved not by rivers but by something heavier, and rocks were scratched in ways that pointed to grinding ice. These discoveries led to the realization that massive glaciers once covered much of the Earth. At first, the thought seemed wild. How could entire continents have been buried under ice? But as more evidence appeared, it became clear. The Earth had indeed gone through times of deep cold, and those times lasted for thousands of years. What's particularly interesting is that even today, scientists debate how many ice ages there have been in total. Some say at least 5 major ones can be identified, stretching far back in geological history. The most famous, and the one most people think of, is the last ice age, which began around 2.5 million years ago and ended roughly 12,000 years ago. But within that span, there were many smaller cycles of cold and warmth. Glaciers advanced, then retreated, then advanced again, like the Earth breathing in slow, icy rhythms. Another layer of complexity is that the ice age was not the same everywhere. In some places, temperatures dropped dramatically, creating tundras and vast ice sheets. In other places, the climate was milder but still affected. Rain patterns changed, deserts expanded or shrank, and coastlines looked completely different. The sea levels were lower because so much water was locked in ice. Places that are now underwater were once dry land, connecting continents in ways that allowed animals and even humans to move across them. This is why, for example, early humans could walk from Asia to North America across what is now the Bering Strait, a stretch that today lies beneath the sea. The concept of an ice age also pushes us to think differently about time. For humans, time is measured in days, years, maybe centuries, but an ice age unfolds over tens of thousands of years, sometimes hundreds of thousands. Imagine a winter that lasts not a few months, but entire lifetimes stacked one after another. Entire generations were born, lived, and died under colder skies, without ever knowing a different climate. The scale is so vast that it can be difficult to grasp, and that is part of what makes the idea so haunting. Even though scientists can define ice ages in terms of geology and climate, for many of us the idea is tied more to imagination. We picture endless white landscapes, strange animals, and people huddled in caves. This picture, though simplified, holds a certain truth. Life during the Ice Age was starkly different from life today, but the deeper meaning of the phrase reminds us that Earth is not fixed. It is a planet of cycles, of warmth and cold, of shifting landscapes that appear steady only within the short frame of human memory. The fascination grows when we realize that ice ages are not locked away in the past. The cycle of glacials and interglacials suggests that, left to natural rhythms, Earth may experience another major glacial advance in the far future. Of course, human activity and modern climate changes have altered that trajectory in ways scientists are still studying. But the thought that the glaciers could one day creep forward again, covering land that now holds cities and farms, adds a layer of wonder and unease. It makes the Ice Age feel not only like a story of the past, but also a possibility for the distant future. So, when we ask, what do we mean by Ice Age, the answer is not simple. It is not just one frozen moment in time, but a vast pattern of Earth's climate that stretches beyond human memory. It is glaciers grinding mountains into dust, oceans rising and falling, animals adapting to survive, and humans learning to endure. It is a reminder that our world is alive in ways we often forget, breathing, changing, shifting, slowly but surely, sometimes toward warmth, sometimes toward cold. And perhaps that is why people remain so fascinated by it. The Ice Age is both history and mystery, both past and possibility, and in its story we find echoes of survival, resilience, and the endless dance between the Earth and the forces that shape it. If you step outside today and look at the hills, rivers, and valleys around you, it might be hard to imagine that many of these landscapes were shaped by giant sheets of ice thousands of years ago. Yet the Earth still carries scars and marks from the Ice Age, written quietly across rocks and soil. Scientists, hikers, and curious wanderers have long noticed these traces. They are like whispers from the past, reminders that the world we know now once looked completely different. To understand the Ice Age, one of the most important things we can do is simply pay attention to the land beneath our feet. One of the clearest signs of the Ice Age is the presence of glaciers, or rather, what they left behind. During the height of the last Ice Age, glaciers moved slowly but with incredible power. Imagine a river, but instead of water flowing, it is solid ice pushing forward inch by inch. These glaciers were so heavy and so vast that they acted like bulldozers, carving deep valleys, scraping across bedrock, and dragging along rocks and soil. When they finally melted, they left behind landscapes that looked carved by a giant hand. Some valleys became U-shaped rather than the V-shape left by rivers. This difference, subtle at first glance, tells scientists that ice, not water, once dominated the land. Another clue can be found in the strange placement of massive rocks, often called erratics. These are boulders that seem out of place, sitting alone in fields or perched on hillsides where no mountain is nearby. They look almost as if someone dropped them there on purpose. In truth, they were carried by glaciers, trapped in the ice as it moved across the land. When the ice melted, the rocks were left behind, sometimes hundreds of miles from where they had originally formed. To early observers, these boulders were puzzling mysteries. Today, we know they are silent storytellers of a time when ice carried pieces of mountains across entire continents. Glaciers also left behind moraines, which are long ridges of rocks and dirt piled up at the edges or ends of the ice. These ridges are like frozen footprints, showing exactly how far the ice once stretched. Walk along a moraine today, and you are literally tracing the border of an ancient glacier. Some moraines are so large they form rolling hills, shaping entire regions. Farmers plow fields on them. Houses stand upon them, and yet their very existence is a reminder of a time when the land was buried under crushing weight. Lakes are another gift of the Ice Age. When glaciers carved deep hollows in the ground, water eventually filled them as the ice melted. The Great Lakes in North America are perhaps the most famous example. These vast inland seas were shaped by glaciers that gouged the land and left behind enormous basins. Today, they are home to millions of people, shipping routes, and entire ecosystems, yet their origin lies in the frozen grip of the Ice Age. Smaller lakes across Europe, Canada, and Asia share similar stories. What we now see as peaceful, sparkling waters were once the footprints of retreating ice. Even smaller features carry traces of that frozen time. Striations, long straight scratches carved into bedrock, show where rocks trapped in glaciers dragged across the earth as surface like sandpaper. If you ever walk across bare stone and notice lines that seem too neat to be natural, there's a good chance you're looking at striations left by glaciers thousands of years ago. These marks are subtle, but once you notice them, they reveal just how much force was at work. Imagine the weight of a mountain of ice dragging boulders across stone, leaving scars that last for millennia. Fossils also help tell the story of the Ice Age. Beneath layers of soil and sediment, scientists have found bones of mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats. These remains remind us that the Ice Age was not only about ice, but also about life. Animals adapted to the cold in remarkable ways, growing thick fur, long tusks, or massive bodies that helped them conserve heat. In frozen places like Siberia, entire mammoths have been discovered preserved in ice, their fur and skin still intact after tens of thousands of years. To see one of these creatures up close is like peering through a window in time, catching a glimpse of a world that is gone but not entirely forgotten. The soil itself carries clues, too. Layers of sediment show patterns of cold and warmth, of times when glaciers advanced and retreated. By drilling deep into the earth or even into ancient ice cores, scientists can read these layers like a history book. Each layer tells a story of climate, of shifting temperatures, of changes that ripple across thousands of years. It is humbling to think that something as simple as a line of dirt or a bubble of air, trapped in ice, can reveal so much about the world long before humans wrote anything down. Rivers also owe much of their shape to the Ice Age. As glaciers melted, they released torrents of water that carved new channels, creating winding rivers and wide floodplains. Some of the world's great rivers were born or reshaped by this process, carrying meltwater that surged across the land with unstoppable force. In some places, these floods created deep canyons or scattered huge rocks across wide areas, leaving behind evidence of a violent but natural transformation. For ordinary people, the traces of the Ice Age can feel both ordinary and extraordinary. A lone boulder in a field, a curved valley, or a sparkling lake might not seem unusual at first glance, but once you know their history, they become portals into a world of ice and cold. The very ground we walk on is a living museum, carrying marks of a time when glaciers covered vast parts of the planet. Perhaps this is part of why the Ice Age fascinates us so much. It is not a story locked away in books or buried in distant time. Its evidence surrounds us, waiting in landscapes, rocks, and fossils that we can still touch and see. It reminds us that the Earth is not static. It changes, it evolves, and it leaves behind reminders of its transformations. To notice these traces is to realize that we are always walking in the footsteps of the past, always surrounded by echoes of worlds that came before us. And so, when we speak of the Ice Age, we are not only talking about glaciers and cold. We are talking about the way the Earth records its own memory, carving stories into rock, water, and soil. The traces are everywhere, if only we pause to look. They connect us to a time that feels distant, yet remains present in the shape of the land beneath our feet. When people imagine the Ice Age, they often picture a world locked in endless cold, as if the Earth had simply decided to freeze. But the truth is more subtle and far more fascinating. The Ice Age was not caused by one single event, like a giant switch being flipped. Instead, it was the result of slow, steady rhythms in the planet's movement around the Sun. These rhythms, tiny changes in the way Earth orbits and tilts, may seem too small to matter. Yet, over thousands of years, they shape the climate in profound ways, setting the stage for glaciers to grow or retreat. To understand this, we need to picture the Earth not as a still ball but as a dynamic traveler spinning through space. Every year, it circles the Sun in an orbit that is not a perfect circle but more of a stretched oval. Sometimes that oval is only slightly stretched, almost round, while other times it is more elongated. Scientists call this eccentricity. It may sound like a fancy word, but all it means is that Earth's path around the Sun changes shape over long stretches of time. When the orbit is more oval, some parts of the year bring the Earth closer to the Sun and others take it farther away. This changes how much solar energy different parts of the planet receive. Over tens of thousands of years, those small differences add up, nudging the planet toward colder or warmer conditions. But eccentricity is only one piece of the puzzle. Earth also tilts on its axis, the invisible line it spins around. Right now, the tilt is about 23.5 degrees, which is why we have seasons. In summer, one hemisphere leans toward the Sun, and in winter, it leans away. But this tilt does not stay the same forever. Over cycles lasting about 41,000 years, the tilt slowly changes, sometimes more steep, sometimes less. A greater tilt means stronger seasons, hotter summers and colder winters. A smaller tilt means gentler seasons, with cooler summers and milder winters. And here's the key. If summers are too mild, snow and ice from the winter may not melt completely. Over time, year after year, that leftover ice builds up, spreading into glaciers that can reshape entire continents. There is also something called precession, which is the slow wobble in Earth's spin, like a spinning top that leans one way and then another. This wobble changes the timing of the seasons relative to Earth's position around the Sun. Over about 26,000 years, precession shifts when winters and summers occur. In some eras, the northern hemisphere has winter when the Earth is farthest from the Sun, making the cold even harsher. In others, winter comes when Earth is closest to the Sun, softening the chill. These shifts may sound small, but when combined with eccentricity and tilt, they can set powerful forces in motion. Together, these three rhythms, eccentricity, tilt, and precession, are known as the Milankovitch cycles, named after the scientist Milutin Milankovitch, who studied how Earth's movements affect climate. His work showed that ice ages are not random. They are linked to the delicate balance of sunlight reaching the Earth over thousands of years. When the cycles align in ways that reduce summer warmth, glaciers grow. When they shift to bring stronger summers, the ice retreats. It is like the planet breathing in slow motion, inhaling ice and exhaling warmth, on timescales far longer than any human life. What is amazing is how such small changes create such vast results. A slight shift in tilt or orbit might only change the amount of sunlight by a tiny percentage. Yet, over centuries, that small change tips the balance between melting ice and growing ice. Once glaciers begin to spread, they reflect more sunlight back into space, cooling the planet even further. This feedback loop deepens the chill, turning a small nudge into a powerful plunge into icy conditions. The opposite is also true. When glaciers retreat, darker land and water absorb more heat, warming the planet and accelerating the melt. In this way, the Earth amplifies its own cycles, creating the dramatic swings we see in the record of ice ages. For ancient humans, of course, none of this science was known. They did not talk about eccentricity or precession. But they experienced the results in the most direct way possible. Colder winters, shifting seasons, lands becoming harder to live on. For them, the rhythms of Earth's orbit were invisible forces that shaped where they could travel, what animals they could hunt, and whether they could survive in a certain place. They must have wondered why the world could change so dramatically, why the land grew colder or warmer, and perhaps they explained it through stories of gods or spirits. Today, with satellites and mathematics, we see the patterns more clearly, but the awe they inspire remains the same. The story of Earth's orbit is humbling, because it reminds us how small we are in the face of cosmic cycles. Our lifetimes are but a blink compared to the slow dance of the planet around the sun. Yet these movements, steady and unstoppable, have the power to shape ice ages, to carve valleys, and to decide whether mammoths or humans could thrive in a given place. It is a reminder that Earth is not a static stage for human life, but a moving, shifting planet engaged in its own long rhythms of change. When we think of the Ice Age in this way, it becomes more than a story of cold. It becomes a story of balance, of cycles, of how even the smallest motions in space can echo across millennia. The land we walk on, the climate we experience, and even the history of our species have all been touched by these invisible patterns. And as we continue to study them, we begin to see not only the past more clearly, but also the possibilities of the future. The role of Earth's orbit in causing the Ice Age is both simple and profound. Small shifts in sunlight, stretched across thousands of years, can build worlds of ice or melt them away. It is a story of patience, of slow but unstoppable change, and of the power of the cosmos to shape life on our small blue planet. And as we move forward in our journey through the Ice Age, we will see how these cycles worked hand in hand with other forces, the oceans, the atmosphere, the very crust of the Earth, to create the frozen world that still fascinates us today. When we think about the Ice Age, it is easy to picture glaciers, snow, and endless cold. But behind all of that, there is a quieter truth. The sun has always been the ultimate driver of Earth's climate. Every beam of light that reaches the surface warms the planet, fuels life, and keeps the delicate balance between ice and warmth. Without the sun, Earth would be a frozen rock drifting in the darkness of space. With the sun, it becomes a living, changing world. And yet, even the sun's power is not constant. Over thousands of years, small changes in how much sunlight reaches Earth can tip the balance toward ice or toward warmth. At its core, the Ice Age story is one of sunlight. The glaciers that spread across continents did so not because the sun vanished, but because its light was distributed differently over time. Even tiny shifts in solar energy, when stretched across centuries, create huge effects. Imagine sitting in a room where the temperature changes by just 1 degree. At first, it seems like nothing, but if that 1 degree lasts for years and years, the room begins to feel very different. In the same way, small changes in solar energy over long stretches of time were enough to cool the planet and allow ice to grow. The Earth receives sunlight unevenly. Near the equator, sunlight shines more directly, creating warmth that fuels jungles and deserts. Near the poles, sunlight arrives at an angle, spreading its energy thin, which makes the climate colder. During the Ice Age, this balance shifted. Summers in the northern hemisphere became cooler, winters grew harsher, and snow that once melted began to stay through the year. Over time, this built thick sheets of ice that reflected even more sunlight back into space. This reflection effect, known as albedo, made the Earth even colder. It was like a feedback loop. Less sunlight meant more ice, and more ice meant even less warmth. The sun itself also goes through cycles. Every 11 years or so, the sun's surface changes, creating sunspots and flares. These short-term changes don't cause ice ages on their own, but they remind us that the sun is not a steady lamp. Over much longer cycles, its brightness can vary slightly, and when combined with Earth's orbital changes, these variations matter. When the Earth was already tilted or positioned in a way that reduced summer warmth, even a small dip in solar energy could help trigger glaciers to expand. What is beautiful about this story is that it shows how interconnected everything is. The Earth does not live in isolation. It dances with the sun, responding to its rhythms. The glaciers, the animals, the forests, all of them are part of a chain that begins with light traveling millions of miles through space. Each photon of sunlight, each tiny particle of energy, carries the potential to melt ice, grow plants, or warm oceans. And when those photons shift just slightly, the entire system adjusts in ways that ripple across the planet. For humans living during the Ice Age, the power of the sun was felt but not understood in scientific terms. They noticed shorter, colder summers, and they adjusted their lives accordingly. They told stories of gods who controlled the skies, of fire stolen from the heavens, of warmth returning after long nights. To them, the sun was not just a star, it was life itself, a sacred force that could bless or curse. They may not have known about orbital cycles or solar variations, but they understood in their bones that the sun decided whether they thrived or suffered. Even today, we can feel the power of the sun in smaller ways. A sunny day in winter feels different from a cloudy one. A long summer day can lift our mood, while a gray stretch of weather feels heavy. Multiply that feeling by thousands of years, and you begin to sense what happened during the Ice Age. The sun's steady presence, slightly dimmed or redirected, was enough to reshape the very bones of the earth. Another way to see the sun's influence is in the oceans. Sunlight warms the surface of the seas, driving currents that carry heat around the globe. During the Ice Age, cooler sunlight in the north meant cooler oceans, which slowed down currents and shifted weather patterns. Rain fell in new places, deserts expanded, and fertile regions shrank. The power of the sun reached not just into the skies but into the depths of the water, changing the way life spread across the planet. In this sense, the Ice Age was not only about cold, but about balance. The Earth is like a careful scale, with sunlight on one side and reflection, atmosphere and oceans on the other. The Ice Age tipped that balance toward cold, not because the sun disappeared, but because small shifts added up to a world where ice held more power than warmth. It is a reminder that sometimes the greatest changes in life come not from sudden shocks, but from quiet, steady shifts that accumulate until the world looks entirely different. As we think about the role of the sun, we also realize how fragile and precious its power is. Every sunrise, every warm afternoon, every plant growing in the light is part of a story billions of years old. The Ice Age is one chapter in that story, showing us how even the sun's gentle variations can write entire epochs of history. And it invites us to look up at the sky with wonder, knowing that the same light that once shone on mammoths and glaciers now falls on us, carrying both memory and promise. The sun's role in the Ice Age is both simple and profound. It gave just enough warmth to keep life alive, but not enough to melt the spreading glaciers. It was the steady heartbeat of the planet, guiding the rhythms of ice and thaw, of survival and change. Without it, there would be no story to tell at all. With it, the story becomes one of awe, a reminder that our frozen past was lit not by darkness, but by the same sun that still shines above us today. When people think of the Ice Age, they often imagine it as nothing more than snow, glaciers, and a cold planet. But behind all that frozen beauty lies another important part of the story: the invisible gases in the air. These gases, though present in small amounts, act like a blanket around the Earth, keeping it from freezing completely. We call them greenhouse gases, and they include carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor. Without them, Earth would be far too cold for life. With too many of them, Earth becomes uncomfortably warm. During the Ice Age, the balance of these gases shifted, and those shifts played a huge role in how the climate changed. To understand this, it helps to think of the atmosphere as a delicate system. Sunlight enters, warming the Earth, and some of that warmth bounces back towards space. Greenhouse gases trap part of that heat, keeping it close to the surface. It's like closing the window on a chilly night. The room stays warmer, not because the heater is stronger, but because the heat doesn't escape so easily. During the Ice Age, levels of carbon dioxide and methane were much lower than they are today. That meant less heat was trapped, and the planet cooled enough for ice sheets to grow. Scientists know this because they have studied tiny bubbles of ancient air trapped in ice cores. In places like Antarctica and Greenland, layers of ice build up year after year, trapping bits of atmosphere inside. When scientists drill deep into these ice sheets, they can pull out cylinders of frozen history. By examining the air bubbles, they can measure exactly how much carbon dioxide or methane was in the air tens of thousands of years ago. What they found is striking. During glacial periods, greenhouse gases dropped to lower levels. During warmer interglacial periods, like the one we live in now, those gases rose again. This discovery shows just how tightly greenhouse gases are connected to Earth's climate. When the air contained less carbon dioxide and methane, the world cooled. When the gases increased, the ice melted and the planet warmed. It was not the only factor. Earth's orbit and the Sun also played roles, but greenhouse gases acted as amplifiers. They made the cold colder and the warmth warmer, pushing the climate further in whichever direction it was already moving. Methane, though less well known than carbon dioxide, was particularly important during the Ice Age. It comes from wetlands, from animals, and from other natural processes. In cold, frozen conditions, less methane was released, which meant the atmosphere trapped less heat. This added to the cooling. When conditions warmed and wetlands expanded, methane levels rose, adding warmth to the system. It is like the planet adjusting its own thermostat, sometimes lowering the heat, sometimes turning it up, depending on what was happening on the ground. For early humans and animals living through the Ice Age, these invisible gases were not something they could see or measure, but they experienced the results directly. Colder climates meant herds of animals migrated differently, plants grew in new places, and water sources froze or dried up. Warmer stretches allowed people to spread further north, hunt new animals, and settle in regions that would later be covered again by ice. Life followed the rhythm of greenhouse gases without knowing it, adapting quietly to the changes in temperature and landscape. What makes the story of greenhouse gases fascinating is that it is not only about the past, it is also about our present. The same gases that influenced the Ice Age are still shaping our climate today. The difference is that back then, changes happened slowly, over thousands of years, through natural processes. Today, human activity, burning coal, oil, and gas, cutting forests, raising large numbers of animals, has increased greenhouse gases much faster. What once shifted gradually now changes in just a few generations. Scientists often look back at the Ice Age as a guide because it shows how powerful even small changes in greenhouse gases can be. If a drop of carbon dioxide helped trigger the growth of glaciers, then an increase, like the one we see today, can push the planet toward heat just as strongly. But in the context of the Ice Age, greenhouse gases were not villains. They were part of the natural balance, helping the Earth breathe between cold and warm phases. They acted like gentle hands on the climate's scale, tilting it slightly one way or the other. Without them, the cycles of ice and thaw would not have unfolded in the same way. Another way to picture it is to think of the Earth's climate as a campfire. The sun is the flame, providing the energy. The orbit of the Earth is like the way the firewood is arranged, deciding how evenly the flames spread. Greenhouse gases are the blanket around the fire. When the blanket is thinner, more heat escapes, and everyone around feels the chill. When the blanket is thicker, the heat stays close, and the fire feels warmer. During the Ice Age, the blanket was thin, and so the world became a frozen landscape. The quiet beauty of this story is that it reminds us how connected everything is. The air above us, though invisible, is powerful enough to change the entire surface of the Earth. The woolly mammoth, the saber-toothed cat, the first humans exploring icy plains, all of them were living in a world partly shaped by gases they never saw. Today, we breathe the same air, warmed by the same greenhouse effect, though in very different conditions. The Ice Age shows us that even the smallest parts of the atmosphere can guide the largest forces of nature. As we think about the role of greenhouse gases during the Ice Age, we are reminded that the Earth is a fragile balance of elements: sunlight, air, oceans, and ice all working together. Each one plays its part, and when one shifts, the others follow. The gases may be invisible, but their fingerprints are written across valleys, rivers, and coastlines, in the fossils of animals long gone, and even in the rise of human civilization. They were, and still are, the quiet breath of the planet, guiding its journey through ages of frost and thaw. When we think about the Ice Age, it is natural to picture frozen glaciers covering the land, but the oceans were just as important in shaping that frozen world. The seas are not still and silent. They are always moving, carrying warm water from one place to another, shifting heat around the globe like invisible conveyor belts. These ocean currents played a huge role in deciding where ice would grow and where it would melt. Without them, the Ice Age would not have unfolded the way it did. The oceans are often described as the planet's great regulators. They store heat from the sun, hold it for long periods of time, and release it slowly into the atmosphere. Warm currents, like great rivers within the sea, carry energy from the tropics toward the poles, softening winters in some places and bringing rain to others. Cold currents carry chilly waters down from the Arctic and Antarctic, cooling regions and influencing weather. It is a constant exchange, a quiet balance that keeps Earth's climate stable enough for life. But during the Ice Age, these currents shifted, and with them, the fate of entire continents changed. One of the most important systems in the ocean is something scientists call thermohaline circulation, sometimes nicknamed the global conveyor belt. It is driven by two things: temperature, thermo, and salt, haline. Warm, salty water flows northward on the surface of the oceans, eventually cooling and sinking when it reaches colder regions. That cold, heavy water then flows back southward deep beneath the surface. This cycle moves energy around the globe and keeps climates steady. During the Ice Age, changes in this circulation made the planet's cold even harsher. Imagine a time when enormous ice sheets covered much of North America and Europe. As they grew, they locked away vast amounts of water, lowering sea levels. At the same time, melting ice poured fresh water into the oceans, especially into the North Atlantic. Fresh water is less salty, and that change in saltiness disrupted the conveyor belt. The usual sinking of salty water slowed, and as a result, less warm water flowed north. Europe, which today benefits from warm currents like the Gulf Stream, became colder, reinforcing the spread of glaciers. In this way, the oceans acted as amplifiers, turning small changes into global shifts. But the relationship between oceans and ice went both ways. As glaciers advanced, they reshaped coastlines, redirected rivers, and altered the flow of water into the seas. When they retreated, they released enormous floods of meltwater, sometimes suddenly, in events that reshaped landscapes in days. In North America, for example, the sudden draining of glacial lakes sent torrents of water rushing across the land, carving canyons and changing the paths of rivers. These floods also poured into the oceans, again disrupting currents and shifting climates far beyond their source. What makes the story of ocean currents during the Ice Age so fascinating is how interconnected everything was. A glacier melting in Canada could change rainfall patterns in Africa. A shift in the saltiness of the North Atlantic could trigger droughts in Asia. The oceans carried the breath of the Ice Age to every corner of the planet, reminding us that Earth is one connected system, where water and air, ice and heat all move together in endless cycles. For early humans, these shifts would not have been explained with science, but their effects were very real. A region that once supported animals might suddenly become barren as rainfall patterns shifted. A coastline that once provided fish might sink beneath rising seas after glaciers melted. To the people living in those times, the changes must have seemed unpredictable and mysterious, forces of nature beyond their control. Yet they adapted, moving to new lands, following herds, and learning to survive in climates that changed beneath their feet. Even the great animals of the Ice Age were shaped by the oceans. Herds of mammoths and bison moved across plains that existed only because sea levels were lower. The land bridge between Asia and North America, known as Beringia, was exposed when the seas dropped, allowing humans and animals to cross. That single shift in sea level, caused by glaciers holding back water, changed the course of human history forever. Without it, the peopling of the Americas might have unfolded very differently. The quiet power of the oceans is that they never stop moving, even when covered by ice. Their currents are invisible to the eye, yet they shape the climate, the land, and the lives of all who depend on them. During the Ice Age, their role was not dramatic like a roaring storm or a crashing glacier, but patient and steady, carrying cold and warmth around the globe. In that sense, the oceans were like the heartbeat of the Ice Age, always pulsing, always guiding the rhythm of ice and thaw. Today, when we look back at the Ice Age, we can still see its fingerprints in the oceans. Many coastlines are shaped by glacial floods, many rivers trace paths carved by meltwater, and many regions hold sediments that reveal ancient shifts in currents. The memory of that frozen world is written in the seas as much as in the land. And as scientists study the currents today, they see patterns that echo those ancient rhythms, reminding us that the oceans remain as powerful now as they were then. The story of ocean currents and ice is a reminder of how connected and delicate Earth's systems are. A drop of fresh water in the North Atlantic, a shift in saltiness, a glacier melting on the other side of the world, all can ripple outward, changing climates, landscapes, and lives. The Ice Age was not only a time of frozen land, but also a time of restless seas, whose hidden movements shaped the destiny of the planet. And so, when we imagine that frozen world, we should not picture silence. Beneath the ice, the oceans were moving, carrying the memory of the sun, spreading the chill of the poles, and guiding the balance of warmth and cold. They were, and still are, the great storytellers of Earth's climate, whispering through waves and currents the history of a world that is always changing. Mountains and volcanoes may seem like solid, unchanging giants, but during the Ice Age they played an important role in shaping both the land and the climate. To understand this, imagine towering peaks wrapped in glaciers, their valleys carved deeper with each passing century, and volcanoes occasionally sending ash into the skies, dimming the sunlight that reached the ground. Together, mountains and volcanoes were not only part of the landscape, but also part of the story of ice. Mountains, with their high elevations, are naturally colder than the lowlands. As snow fell on their peaks year after year, it didn't always melt away in the summer. Instead, it piled up, pressing down on the layers beneath it, slowly turning into ice. Over thousands of years, these mountain glaciers grew heavier, creeping downhill like slow rivers of frozen rock. They carved valleys, shaped ridges, and polished stone surfaces until the very bones of the mountains were reshaped. Even today, in places like the Alps, the Rockies, or the Himalayas, we can see valleys with U-shapes, a signature mark left by glaciers that once filled them. But mountains did more than hold ice. They also guided winds, blocked storms, and created shadows where deserts formed. During the Ice Age, the position of mountains often decided where ice would grow thick and where it would remain thin. For example, when moist winds carrying snow blew toward a mountain range, they would rise, cool, and drop their load of snow on one side. That side would grow icy, while the other might stay dry and bare, creating stark contrasts in climate within a relatively short distance. Volcanoes, on the other hand, added a dramatic twist to the Ice Age story. While mountains stood silently, volcanoes reminded the Earth that it was alive beneath its crust. When a volcano erupted, it poured ash and gases into the sky. Some eruptions were small and local, but others were powerful enough to spread ash clouds across continents. These clouds reflected sunlight back into space, cooling the Earth's surface. In extreme cases, such eruptions could cause years of colder weather, with shorter growing seasons and harsher winters. Scientists believe that volcanic activity may have helped tip the balance between warm and cold phases of the Ice Age. A single large eruption would not start an ice age on its own, but repeated eruptions over time added layers of cooling that reinforce the natural cycles already at work. Ash falling on snow and ice also made them darker, which might sound small, but it had a big effect. Darker surfaces absorb more sunlight, which sometimes led to more melting. In this way, volcanoes could either cool the planet or, in certain cases, help speed up melting, depending on what they released and where the ash landed. It is almost poetic to think about. Glaciers creeping silently through valleys while volcanoes rumbled and roared, shaking the ground, sending rivers of fire down their slopes. One part of the earth pulling the world toward ice, the other reminding it of its fiery core. These two forces, seemingly opposite, cold glaciers and hot magma, worked together to shape the Ice Age world. For the people and animals living at the time, mountains and volcanoes were both home and hazard. Herds of mammoths grazed on valleys shaped by ice. Humans found shelter in caves carved into cliffs and mountainsides, their walls smoothed by glaciers long before. At the same time, volcanic eruptions could send ash raining down on them, covering the land, choking rivers, and forcing migrations. Stories passed down through generations may have remembered these events in the form of myths, tales of fiery mountains or gods who breathed smoke and ash. Even now, the fingerprints of Ice Age glaciers remain clear in the mountains around us. Lakes formed in their wake, scooped out by ice and left behind when glaciers melted. Fjords, those deep, narrow sea inlets found in places like Norway, are also the legacy of Ice Age glaciers cutting through mountains and valleys before filling with seawater. Volcanoes, too, left lasting scars. Layers of ancient ash are still found in soils, feeding forests and fields long after the eruptions ended. What makes mountains and volcanoes so central to the Ice Age is their ability to remind us that the Earth is not still. It is alive, always moving, always reshaping itself. The ice came and went, but the mountains carried its memory in their shapes. Volcanoes erupted, cooled, and erupted again, writing fiery chapters into the frozen story. The balance between fire and ice gave the Ice Age its drama. An Earth caught between two extremes, yet still capable of supporting life. If we think of the Ice Age as a grand stage, then mountains were the backdrop, silent and majestic, while volcanoes were the sudden bursts of sound and light, changing the mood in an instant. Together, they framed the story, showing that even in the coldest of times, the Earth's heart of fire continued to beat. And so, as we picture the frozen world of the Ice Age, we should not only imagine endless plains of snow. We should also see the peaks of mountains draped in white, the valleys carved smooth by glaciers, and every so often the dramatic flash of a volcano lighting up the sky, its ash drifting across the frozen land. It was a world of contrasts, of silence and thunder, of stillness and eruption, and all of it shaped the history of our planet in ways we still see today. When we think about the Ice Age, it's impossible not to imagine the creatures that roamed the frozen world. The land was filled with animals that seem almost mythical to us now. Towering mammoths with long curved tusks, giant sloths that could reach the tops of trees, fierce saber-toothed cats with teeth like daggers, and herds of bison so large they stretched across the horizon. These animals were not just survivors of the cold. They were shaped by it, molded into forms that could endure the challenges of ice and snow. The most famous of all Ice Age animals is probably the woolly mammoth. Covered in shaggy hair, with a thick layer of fat beneath their skin, they were like walking machines built for the cold. Their tusks curved in wide arcs, sometimes stretching longer than a grown person, and they used them to dig through snow to reach grass buried beneath. Imagine a herd of them moving slowly across the icy plains, the ground shaking beneath their heavy steps, the air filled with the low rumble of their calls. To humans who saw them, mammoths must have seemed both terrifying and majestic, like something out of a dream. But mammoths were not alone. Alongside them lived mastodons, which looked similar but were actually quite different. Their teeth were shaped for chewing leaves and twigs rather than grass, so they often lived in forests rather than open plains. Where mammoths wandered the steppe, mastodons preferred wooded areas, quietly pulling down branches and stripping bark from trees. Together, they filled different parts of the Ice Age world, each adapted to its own niche. Then there were the predators. The saber-toothed cat, or Smilodon, is one of the most iconic. Its long fangs could grow as long as 7 inches, sharp and deadly, perfect for taking down large prey. Despite their fearsome appearance, scientists believe saber-toothed cats were not fast runners like modern cheetahs. Instead, they used stealth and strength, ambushing their prey and delivering powerful bites. Imagine the silence of the frozen plains broken suddenly by the roar of one of these cats leaping onto a mammoth calf or a bison. The Ice Age was as dangerous as it was beautiful. Another predator of the time was the dire wolf, made famous by stories and television today, but once a very real animal. Larger and heavier than modern wolves, dire wolves hunted in packs, their strength not in speed but in cooperation. They could take down animals much larger than themselves, working together with skill that came from instinct and long practice. To early humans, a howl in the distance at night might have meant not just one wolf, but dozens, waiting just beyond the firelight. Not all Ice Age animals were giants or hunters. Some were gentle, slow-moving, yet still extraordinary. The giant ground sloth, for example, could grow up to 20 feet tall when standing on its hind legs. Despite their size, they ate plants, pulling down tree branches with their massive claws. Picture one of them lumbering through a forest, moving slowly, pausing to strip leaves before settling down for a long rest. They were peaceful giants, reminders that not all survival required speed or sharp teeth. There were also creatures that might surprise us with their presence in such a cold world. Camels, for instance, originally evolved in North America during the Ice Age, not the deserts of today. Some migrated to Asia and became the camels we know now, while others stayed behind, adapted for the icy plains. Horses, too, roamed the grasslands of the Ice Age, galloping in great herds long before they were ever tamed by humans. Many of these species eventually went extinct in the Americas, but their legacy lived on elsewhere. Birds filled the skies, many of them much larger than what we see today. Giant vultures and condors circled above the herds, waiting for the weak to fall or the predators to leave behind scraps. In rivers and seas, fish and seals thrived, adapted to the colder waters. Even in the harshest conditions, life found a way to spread into every corner. For early humans, these animals were not just part of the scenery. They were everything. Mammoths provided meat, fur, and bones for tools and shelter. Hunting one was dangerous but worth the risk, as it could feed an entire group for weeks. Smaller animals like reindeer, bison, and horses were also vital. Their skins turned into clothing, their bones into needles and weapons. Predators were both threats and teachers. By watching how wolves hunted, humans may have learned the value of cooperation. In time, they even formed partnerships with wolves, leading to the domesticated dogs that still live with us today. The Ice Age animals shaped human culture, myths, and survival. Cave paintings in Europe, some more than 30,000 years old, show detailed images of mammoths, bison, and horses, drawn with care and skill. These paintings were more than art. They were connections between humans and the animals they depended on, symbols of respect, fear, and gratitude. But the Ice Age was not kind to all of its creatures. As climates warmed and glaciers retreated, many of these animals began to disappear. Some could not adapt quickly enough to the changing landscapes. Others may have been hunted too heavily by humans. By the end of the Ice Age, the mammoth, the saber-toothed cat, The giant sloth and many others were gone, leaving behind only fossils and memories. Their absence reshaped ecosystems, forcing humans and surviving animals to adjust once again. Even so, the story of Ice Age animals is not only about loss, it is also about wonder. These creatures remind us of a time when the world was filled with giants, when the land shook beneath their steps, and when humans lived side by side with animals that today seem almost legendary. The fact that we can still see their bones, their frozen bodies preserved in ice, or their paintings on cave walls connects us to that ancient world. It reminds us that the Ice Age was not only a frozen landscape, but a living, breathing place filled with extraordinary life. And so, when we picture the Ice Age, we should see more than glaciers and snow. We should see mammoths moving across the plains, saber-toothed cats crouching in the shadows, dire wolves howling at the moon, and humans standing close to their fires, watching the same stars we see today. It was a world of survival, of beauty, and of creatures that shaped the course of history, even as many of them faded away. When we imagine humans during the Ice Age, it is easy to think of them as fragile figures huddled around fires, barely surviving in a frozen wilderness. And in many ways, life truly was hard. But what is remarkable is not only the struggle they endured, but also how they adapted, how they found ways to live in a world that seemed determined to freeze them out. The story of humans in the Ice Age is one of patience, creativity, and quiet strength. The cold was relentless. Winters were long and brutal, stretching for months with little relief. Even in summer, the air could be chilly, and nights were bitterly cold. People did not have thick fur like animals or heavy layers of fat like the mammoth. They had only their minds, their hands, and their communities. To survive, they learned to use everything the environment offered. Clothing became one of the most important tools. Skins and furs of animals like reindeer, bison, and mammoths were carefully scraped, softened, and stitched together into warm garments. Archaeologists have found evidence of bone needles, showing that Ice Age humans were sewing clothes thousands of years ago. Imagine a family sitting in a cave, the flicker of firelight on the walls, as someone patiently threaded sinew through a piece of hide, shaping a coat that might save a child's life during the next snowstorm. Shelter was another challenge. Caves offered natural protection, and many groups sought them out, but caves were not everywhere. In open plains, people built shelters from mammoth bones, stacking them into circles and covering them with hides. These strange, dome-like structures must have looked almost surreal against the white landscape, a small sign of warmth and life in a world of ice. Inside, fires burned, smoke drifted upward, and families huddled together, their laughter and songs muffled by the thick walls of fur. Fire was more than just heat. It was survival itself. It provided light in the endless dark, warmth in the endless cold, and protection against predators. People carried fire with them, guarding embers carefully so they would not have to start from scratch. Around fires they cooked meat, shared stories, and painted on cave walls. Fire was the center of human life, the heart of every community. Food was never guaranteed. Hunting was dangerous and exhausting. A successful mammoth hunt might feed dozens of people, but it required courage and cooperation. Spears tipped with stone were thrust toward massive animals, while hunters risked being crushed beneath hooves or tusks. Not every hunt succeeded, and sometimes entire groups had to go hungry. Smaller animals like rabbits, deer, or fish were also hunted, and plants were gathered when the seasons allowed. But in the frozen heart of the Ice Age, survival often depended on the big hunts, the ones that required every able hand to succeed. It is easy to forget that children were part of this world too. Imagine growing up surrounded by snow and ice, learning to walk in heavy furs, watching the elders shape tools from stone and bone. Games, perhaps, were not just for fun, but also for training. Throwing sticks, running, and hiding prepared children for the skills they would need as adults. The cold was always there, but so was joy. In the laughter of children, even the Ice Age had warmth. Sickness and injury were constant threats. Without modern medicine, even a broken bone could mean disaster. Yet people cared for each other. Archaeologists have found skeletons of individuals who lived for years with severe injuries, meaning their groups must have supported them, shared food, and kept them alive. In this way, the struggle against the cold was not only individual, but communal. People survived because they stood together. Spiritual life also played a role. In the flickering light of fire, people painted mammoths, bison, horses, and handprints on the walls of caves. Perhaps these paintings were prayers for a successful hunt, or perhaps they were ways of honoring the animals that gave them life. Some buried their dead with care, placing tools, ornaments, or red ochre with the body, as if preparing them for another world beyond. These practices show us that even in the hardest times, humans sought meaning, comfort, and hope. The cold shaped everything. It shaped where people lived, what they ate, how they dressed, and how they saw the world. It demanded endurance, but also sparked creativity. Stone tools became more refined, clothing became more complex, and shelters became stronger. The challenges of the Ice Age pushed humans to adapt in ways that prepared them for the future. And yet, life was not only struggle. There must have been moments of peace. Watching the northern lights dance across the sky, hearing the crackle of fire while snow fell softly outside, or looking out over a frozen plain with herds of animals moving slowly in the distance. These moments remind us that even in hardship, beauty was always present. For early humans, the Ice Age was home. They did not know a warmer world was coming. They only knew the cold, the animals, and the rhythm of survival. And in that rhythm, they built the foundations of humanity: cooperation, creativity, resilience. The struggles of the cold did not defeat them. They shaped them. And because of that, we are here today, able to tell their story. When we picture humans living in the Ice Age, it is easy to imagine them as small figures surrounded by snow and giant animals. But one of the most important reasons they survived at all was because of their tools. Tools were their extensions, their way of shaping the world to meet their needs. Every chipped stone, every carved bone, every carefully tied spear was a quiet triumph of human creativity. The story of Ice Age tools is not just about survival. It is about ingenuity and patience. The earliest and most common tools were made from stone. At first glance, these tools may seem simple, just sharp edges chipped off a larger rock. But they were carefully made, shaped with repeated strikes, and designed for specific tasks. Some were sharp enough to cut through thick hides, while others were strong enough to break bones open and reach the nourishing marrow inside. To make even one of these tools required practice and skill. Imagine sitting by a fire, holding a piece of flint and striking it with precision, again and again, until a usable blade emerged. A mistake might break the stone, but a successful tool could mean the difference between eating and starving. Over time, stone tools became more refined. People learned to create spearheads with long, sharp points, thin blades for slicing meat, scrapers for cleaning hides, and awls for piercing holes in leather. Each tool had its purpose, and together they formed a toolkit that could handle the challenges of daily life. Archaeologists today can recognize these tools and often marvel at how advanced they were, even tens of thousands of years ago. But stone was not the only material. Bones and antlers were also shaped into useful objects. A long bone might be carved into a needle, smooth and sharp, with an eye at one end for threading sinew. With such a needle, people could sew clothing fitted closely to the body, layering hides into coats, leggings, and boots. Antlers, strong yet flexible, were sometimes turned into handles or used to pressure flake stone, making the edges sharper. Every part of an animal had value, not only as food but as material for tools. Wood, too, played an important role, though it has not survived as well in the archaeological record. Wooden spears and clubs likely accompanied stone points, creating weapons for hunting. Fire-hardened sticks may have been used to dig or to fend off predators. Rope and string, made from plant fibers or animal sinew, tied tools together, bound hides, and made life just a little easier. These small, simple things were essential for survival. One of the most impressive inventions of the Ice Age was the spear thrower, sometimes called an atlatl. It was a simple lever made of wood or bone that allowed hunters to throw spears much farther and with greater force. With this tool, humans could hunt large animals more safely, staying farther away from dangerous tusks or horns. Later, bows and arrows would appear, but even the early spear thrower was a remarkable step forward. It showed that humans were not just reacting to their environment. They were changing the rules of survival. The tools also tell us about the daily rhythm of Ice Age life. A scraper might be used by someone sitting near a fire, cleaning the hide of an animal while children played nearby. A hammerstone might echo against flint as someone shaped a blade while others prepared food. Tools were part of every task, woven into the fabric of survival. They were not just objects, they were companions in the struggle against the cold. Art, too, emerged from these same hands. While some tools were purely practical, others show signs of creativity. Carvings on bones, patterns etched into stone, and even small figurines made from ivory remind us that humans were not only focused on survival. They also found time to decorate, to imagine, and to express themselves. A carved reindeer on a piece of antler, or a tiny figurine shaped like a human, tells us that these people saw beauty in the world around them, even in the harshest times. What makes the story of tools so fascinating is that they grew more complex as humans did. Each generation learned from the one before, adding new techniques, shaping sharper points, creating finer needles. Knowledge was passed on through watching, practicing, and teaching. In this way, tools were not only physical objects but also carriers of memory and tradition. They connected people across time, linking parents to children, hunters to learners, the past to the future. To us today, these tools may look simple compared to modern machines, but in their time they were powerful. With them, humans could bring down animals far larger than themselves, build shelters strong enough to withstand storms, and create clothing that kept them alive in freezing winds. Without them, the Ice Age might have been too much for humanity to endure. And yet, perhaps the most important lesson from these tools is not their complexity, but their purpose. Each one represented a small victory over the cold, a little spark of survival in a world of ice. Each one was a reminder that humans, though fragile in body, were strong in spirit and imagination. It was this combination of struggle and creativity that carried them through, shaping not just the Ice Age but the path of human history itself. So, when we picture the Ice Age, we should see not only the mammoths and the glaciers, but also the quiet image of a person sitting by a fire carefully shaping a stone or sewing a piece of hide or tying a spear point with sinew. These small acts, repeated countless times across generations, were the true foundation of survival. They remind us that history is not only written in great battles or dramatic events, but also in the steady, patient work of human hands. When we think about humans in the Ice Age, it is easy to imagine them as hunters wrapped in furs, carrying spears, always fighting against the cold. But they were not only survivors, they were also dreamers, artists, and storytellers. One of the most moving reminders of their inner lives is found deep in caves across Europe, Asia, and other parts of the world. Art, painted, carved, and drawn thousands of years ago. These works tell us that even in a frozen world, humans still sought beauty, meaning, and a way to share their stories. Cave art is often found in places far from the entrances of caves. People crawled or walked into the darkness, sometimes squeezing through narrow passages, to reach hidden chambers. There, by the light of torches or stone lamps filled with animal fat, they painted animals, shapes, and symbols on the walls. The flickering flames would have made the paintings come alive, as if the animals were moving across the rock. To step into one of those caves must have felt like entering another world, a world where imagination and reality blurred together. The subjects of these paintings were most often animals. Mammoths, bison, horses, reindeer, and lions appear again and again, drawn with skill and care. Some images are simple outlines, while others are filled with detail, showing fur, horns, and muscles. The artists clearly knew these animals well. They had hunted them, tracked them, watched them move across the plains. Their art was not random. It was born from deep familiarity and respect. But why did they paint them? That is a question we can never answer fully. Some scholars believe the paintings were part of rituals, perhaps made to ensure success in hunting. Others think they were spiritual, a way of connecting with the animals, honoring them, or seeking their protection. Still others suggest the paintings were simply a way to pass knowledge, teaching younger generations what different animals looked like and how they moved. Whatever the reason, the paintings show us that Ice Age humans were not only practical, but also symbolic thinkers. They wanted to express more than survival. They wanted to tell stories. Symbols and handprints are also found in many caves. Some handprints are painted in red or black, made by pressing a hand covered in pigment against the wall. Others were created by blowing pigment around the hand, leaving behind a ghostly outline. To see one of these handprints today is to feel a strange connection, as if the person who left it is reaching across time to touch us. Thousands of years have passed, but their hand is still there, silent and human, a reminder that they once stood in the same place. The colors used in cave art came from natural materials. Red and yellow pigments came from ochre, a type of iron-rich clay. Black was often made from charcoal or manganese. These pigments were ground into powders mixed with fat or water, and applied with fingers, brushes made from hair, or by blowing through hollow bones. It was careful, patient work, and the fact that so much of it survives today is a testament to the skill and dedication of those artists. Carvings and sculptures also appeared during the Ice Age. Small figurines made from bone, ivory, or stone have been found, many of them shaped like animals, and some shaped like human figures. The most famous are the so-called Venus figurines, small carvings of women with exaggerated features, often interpreted as symbols of fertility, motherhood, or abundance. Holding one of these figurines, you can almost imagine the person who made it, their hands smoothing the shape, their mind full of hopes or beliefs we can only guess at. These creations show us something profound. Even in the hardest conditions, humans had time for art. Survival took up much of their lives, but they still made space for imagination. They painted not just because they needed to, but because they wanted to. They wanted to leave marks, to create, to make something that lasted beyond a single moment. What is perhaps most moving about Ice Age art is its humanity. When we look at a painting of a bison drawn on a cave wall 30,000 years ago, we are not just looking at history. We are looking at a mind, a person, someone who saw the same stars, felt the same cold, and dreamed the same way we do. Their world was different, but their desire to create, to express, was the same as ours. Art was also a form of connection. Gathering in a cave, lit by the glow of fire, people might have told stories, pointing to the animals on the walls, speaking of hunts, of spirits, of dreams. Children might have traced shapes with their fingers, learning from their elders. In those moments, art was more than pictures. It was part of the rhythm of life, weaving people together through shared meaning. Even the act of making art itself may have brought comfort. To paint an animal, to leave a handprint, was a way of saying, "I am here. I exist. I have seen this world, and I leave a mark of it behind." In the vast silence of the Ice Age, where snow stretched for miles and nights lasted long, such a mark must have carried deep meaning. Today, when we step into caves like Lascaux in France or Altamira in Spain, we are entering their world. The paintings glow under careful lights, the same animals walking across the walls that once guided and inspired those who lived thousands of years ago. Though we can only guess at their full meaning, we can feel their power. They are quiet messages from the past, reminders that humanity has always been more than survival. We have always been storytellers. So, when we imagine Ice Age humans, let us not see only hunters and gatherers struggling against the cold. Let us also see artists and dreamers, people whose hands left red and black shapes on stone, whose eyes followed the movements of painted animals, whose voices carried stories through the darkness of caves. Their art is not just decoration. It is proof that even in the coldest times, the human spirit found warmth in creativity. When people live in a world filled with mystery, danger, and beauty, they do more than just survive. They create stories to explain what they see, to make sense of what they cannot control, and to pass down lessons to the next generation. During the Ice Age, when nights were long and shadows flickered in the firelight, myths must have been born. Though we cannot know exactly what those stories sounded like, we can imagine how early humans might have told them, their voices echoing softly inside caves, their words blending with the howl of the wind outside. Picture a small group gathered around a fire. The flames dance against the walls, lighting up paintings of mammoths and bison. Children lean close, their eyes wide, while elders begin to speak. Perhaps they tell of the great animals that roam the plains, not only as prey but as sacred beings, spirits who give their lives so the people may live. Maybe they explain that a hunt will only succeed if the hunters show respect, if they treat the animals with honor and gratitude. In this way, myths were more than entertainment. They were guides for survival. The ice itself must have seemed alive. Glaciers creaked and groaned as they moved, making sounds that echoed like distant thunder. Avalanches thundered down mountainsides, rivers froze and cracked, and the northern lights shimmered across the sky. To humans without modern science, these must have seemed like messages from another world. A glacier that swallowed a valley might be explained as the work of a giant spirit. The northern lights could be the dancing souls of ancestors, or the fires of gods burning above. Myths gave meaning to the overwhelming power of nature. Animals featured heavily in these imagined stories. The saber-toothed cat, with its long fangs, may have been seen as a guardian of the underworld, or a spirit of strength and danger. Mammoths, enormous and shaggy, might have been considered creators, their tusks holding up the earth or carving valleys as they walked. Birds that migrated away in winter and returned in spring could symbolize life, death, and rebirth. Every creature had a place not only in the physical world but also in the spiritual one, woven into the myths of survival. Fire, too, surely had its legends. To early humans, fire was magic. It provided warmth, light, and protection, yet it was dangerous and could destroy if not respected. Perhaps stories were told of how fire was a gift from the gods, or stolen by a clever ancestor, or kept alive by spirits deep inside the earth. Myths around fire would have carried warnings and wisdom. Never waste it, never forget its power, and always keep it close. Burials also give us clues about myth in the Ice Age. Some people were laid to rest with red ochre sprinkled over their bodies, a pigment that looked like blood. Perhaps this symbolized life continuing beyond death, or a rebirth into another world. Tools, ornaments, and food were sometimes buried with them, as if preparing the dead for a journey. These practices suggest that humans believed in an afterlife, a world beyond this one, where the spirits of ancestors waited. Myths would have given shape to those beliefs, offering comfort against the fear of death. The natural world gave endless inspiration. The sound of the wind through trees, the glitter of stars on a clear night, the rising of the moon, all could become parts of stories. A streak of light across the sky might be explained as a hunter, a spear thrown by a god. A sudden storm might be blamed on a spirit angered by disrespect. Every mystery could become a tale, and every tale a lesson. What makes these myths so fascinating is that they were not written down. They lived only in voices, passed from one person to another, growing and changing with each telling. They were flexible, adapting to new situations, new lands, new challenges. As humans migrated across continents, they carried their stories with them, weaving them into the landscapes they encountered. The myths of the Ice Age became the roots of the myths we know today, ancestors of the legends that would later shape civilizations. Even the act of storytelling was powerful. In a time when survival demanded constant work, hunting, gathering, sowing, building, storytelling was a pause, a moment of rest and imagination. It allowed people to step away from the harshness of the cold and enter another world, one filled with meaning and wonder. For children, it was education disguised as magic. For adults, it was a way to explain the unexplainable. For everyone, it was a bond that tied the community together. Today, we can only guess at the details of these myths, but we know their presence through the traces left behind, art, burials, symbols, and the human need for meaning. The Ice Age was not just a time of survival. It was also a time of imagination, when humans looked at the world around them and created stories that explained, comforted, and inspired. And so, when we imagine the Ice Age, we should not see only the cold and the struggle. We should also hear the voices in the dark, telling stories of giants and spirits, of animals and gods, of fire and ice. We should see the glow of firelight against painted walls, the children listening, the elders speaking, the myths weaving their way through generations. In that frozen world, myths were warmth too, a different kind of fire, one that burned in the mind and the heart, guiding humans through the long, dark nights. As the Ice Age drew toward its end, the world began to change in ways that were both subtle and dramatic. The climate warmed, glaciers melted, and landscapes that had been frozen for tens of thousands of years transformed into green valleys, rivers, and forests. This might sound like a welcome shift after so much cold, but for many of the giant animals that defined the Ice Age, it marked the beginning of their decline. This was the age when the giants, the mammoths, the mastodons, the saber-toothed cats, and many others, slowly faded from the earth. For tens of thousands of years, these animals had ruled the frozen plains. They were perfectly adapted to the cold. Mammoths had thick coats of shaggy fur and layers of fat that protected them against icy winds. Saber-toothed cats were strong enough to take down large prey, using their long teeth with deadly precision. Giant ground sloths moved slowly but surely, feeding on vegetation in forests and grasslands. They had flourished in the cold world of the Ice Age, but when that world disappeared, so too did their place in it. One of the biggest challenges was the change in vegetation. As the glaciers retreated and temperatures rose, the tundra and steppe, vast open grasslands filled with hardy plants, began to shrink. Forests expanded in their place, covering areas that had once been open plains. For animals like mammoths and bison, which thrived on grass, this was a serious problem. Their food sources dwindled, and they were forced to travel farther and farther to find enough to eat. In a way, the warming climate quietly starved them, but climate was not the only factor. Humans were also spreading across the globe, growing in number and skill. With their spears, traps, and eventually more advanced weapons, they hunted the giants not just for food, but also for fur, bones, and ivory. A mammoth hunt could provide an entire community with meat, clothing, shelter, and tools. To Ice Age humans, these animals were vital, but their hunting may have tipped the balance against the giants at a time when they were already struggling to survive. Imagine a herd of mammoths on the move, their breath steaming in the cool air, calves walking close to their mothers. Hunters follow at a distance, waiting for the right moment to strike. Spears fly, shouts echo, and chaos erupts as the herd tries to protect its young. For the people, this meant survival. For the mammoths, it meant another step toward extinction. Not every giant disappeared instantly. Some survived in isolated pockets long after the Ice Age ended. Woolly mammoths, for example, lived on Wrangel Island, north of Siberia, until around 4,000 years ago, at a time when humans were already building pyramids in Egypt. The idea that mammoths and humans coexisted for so long is astonishing. But eventually, even these last survivors vanished, leaving only bones and frozen remains behind. The saber-toothed cat, too, could not adapt to the new world. As their prey disappeared or became harder to catch in the changing landscapes, they lost their advantage. Their powerful bodies and long teeth, once so perfectly suited to the Ice Age, became less useful. Without enough food, their populations declined until they disappeared completely. The giant ground sloth, which once roamed the Americas, also could not survive. These massive creatures, some as large as elephants, were slow and vulnerable. As forests changed and human hunters spread into their territories, they gradually vanished. Today, only their smaller relatives remain, hanging from trees in South America, a quiet reminder of the giants that once were. Even the great mastodons, close cousins of the mammoths, faced the same fate. They were forest dwellers, feeding on twigs and leaves, but as climates shifted and humans hunted them, they too disappeared. What had once been a world of giants became a world of smaller, more adaptable animals. The end of the giants was not sudden, like a single disaster, but gradual, unfolding over thousands of years. Each species faced its own challenges, but together they tell a story of change. The warming climate reshaped the land, the shrinking grasslands starved the herds, and humans, clever, determined, and resourceful, pushed them further toward extinction. Yet even in their absence, the giants left a legacy. Their bones became part of human memory, inspiring myths and legends. Some believe that the bones of mammoths were once thought to belong to dragons or giants of old, their curved tusks mistaken for horns. Their images on cave walls tell us that humans admired and respected them, even as they hunted them. The memory of the giants lived on long after the animals themselves were gone. It is a bittersweet story. The giants made the Ice Age world extraordinary, filling it with creatures that seem almost magical to us now. Their disappearance reminds us how fragile life can be when the environment changes. But it also reminds us of the resilience of humans, who adapted as the giants fell, carrying their memory into the future. And so, when we think of the Ice Age, we should not only see the cold and the ice, or even the survival of humans. We should also see the giants, the mammoths shaking snow from their backs, the saber-toothed cats prowling in the shadows, the sloths moving slowly through ancient forests. We should remember their strength, their beauty, and their eventual silence. Their story is part of our story, woven into the long journey of life on Earth. As the Ice Age came to a close, one of the most dramatic changes on Earth was the retreat of the glaciers. For tens of thousands of years, massive sheets of ice had stretched across continents, carving valleys, flattening landscapes, and shaping the very face of the planet. These glaciers were so large that they held much of the world's water frozen inside them, locking the oceans at lower levels and exposing land bridges that connected continents. But as the climate warmed, the glaciers began to melt, and the world transformed in ways that would affect life forever. Imagine a wall of ice taller than a skyscraper, stretching as far as the eye can see. That was the reality of many northern lands during the Ice Age. These glaciers moved slowly, grinding rock beneath them like sandpaper, leaving behind deep grooves and wide valleys. Entire regions were sculpted by their weight. When they finally began to melt, the process was gradual, but the changes they unleashed were enormous. One of the most immediate effects was the rising of sea levels. As the glaciers released their water, the oceans crept upward, flooding coastlines and drowning lands that had once been home to plants, animals, and even early humans. Areas that had been wide-open plains became sea floors. One of the most famous examples is the land bridge known as Beringia, which once connected Asia and North America. For thousands of years, animals and people crossed it freely, migrating into new lands. But when the glaciers melted, the rising seas swallowed the bridge, cutting off that route forever. The melting also created thousands of lakes and rivers. In North America, the retreat of glaciers formed the Great Lakes, massive bodies of water that remain today. Meltwater carved channels, filled basins, and reshaped entire regions. Rivers changed their courses, carving new paths across the land. For people living in these times, the world around them must have felt alive, constantly shifting and reshaping. Valleys once filled with ice became fertile grasslands, perfect for animals and humans to explore. Yet the melting of glaciers was not always gentle. Sometimes it unleashed violent floods that swept across continents. As ice dams broke, enormous walls of water rushed forward, carving out land and changing ecosystems in a matter of hours. The force of these floods was almost unimaginable. Entire valleys were stripped bare, rocks carried for miles, and landscapes remade overnight. To those who witnessed such events, it must have seemed like the world itself was breaking apart. The disappearance of the glaciers also changed the climate in dramatic ways. Without the reflective white ice to bounce sunlight back into space, the Earth absorbed more heat, making it even warmer. The balance of winds and weather shifted, bringing new rainfall patterns. Regions that had once been dry became green, while others grew harsher. Plants spread into areas that had been frozen wastelands, creating new ecosystems that animals quickly moved into. Forests expanded, grasslands shifted, and deserts grew in unexpected places. For humans, these changes brought both challenges and opportunities. Some communities found new fertile lands where they could hunt and gather, while others had to leave their homes as rising waters swallowed them. People were forced to adapt, moving with the shifting world around them. New tools, new shelters, and new ways of life developed as the environment demanded flexibility. The melting glaciers also left behind clues that still fascinate scientists today. Rocks and boulders carried for hundreds of miles were deposited in strange places, called glacial erratics. Striations or scratches carved into stone revealed the movement of ice long ago. Layers of soil and sediment showed how the land had changed over time. Even now, scientists study these marks to understand how glaciers shaped the Earth and how quickly they melted. In some ways, the retreat of the glaciers was the true end of the Ice Age. It marked the point when the frozen world gave way to the warmer, greener Earth we know today. The great animals struggled and faded. The oceans rose, and humans stepped into a new chapter of history. The melting of glaciers was not only a natural event but also a turning point in the story of life. And yet, even though the glaciers have retreated, their legacy remains. The valleys they carved, the lakes they created, and the landscapes they shaped are still with us. Every time we see the wide, U-shaped valleys and mountains or walk along the shores of the Great Lakes, we are looking at the fingerprints of glaciers long gone. There is something humbling about imagining ice so powerful it could crush mountains, then watching how time and warmth slowly undid it all. The glaciers seemed eternal, but they were not. They, too, came and went, leaving behind a world forever changed. And so when we think about the end of the Ice Age, we must picture not only the animals and people, but also the silent giants of ice, slowly melting quietly, retreating, and reshaping the Earth one drop at a time. The melting of the glaciers was both an ending and a beginning, closing the chapter of a frozen world and opening the door to the landscapes we live in today. As the Ice Age slowly loosened its grip on the Earth, it wasn't only the landscapes and animals that changed. Humans, too, had to adapt to a new world. For tens of thousands of years, people had survived in frozen environments, learning how to hunt mammoths, build shelters from bones and hides, and keep fires burning through long winters. But when the glaciers melted and the climate shifted, the survival strategies that once worked so well no longer fit. This was a turning point for humanity, a moment of incredible adjustment and creativity. Picture a group of families moving across a land that just a generation earlier had been covered in ice. The ground is wet and fertile now, green plants growing where there was once only frost. Rivers are fuller, Lakes shimmer in the sunlight, and animals are changing too. Some of the great beasts of the Ice Age are still around, but fewer in number. Others have already disappeared. People who once relied on mammoth hunts for food, clothing, and shelter must now look elsewhere. One way humans adapted was by diversifying their diet. Instead of focusing mainly on large game, they began to hunt smaller animals, gather plants, fish in rivers, and collect shellfish along coastlines. This shift required new tools and new skills. Spears gave way to more delicate weapons like bows and arrows, which could bring down smaller prey more efficiently. Fishing hooks and nets appeared, along with baskets for gathering fruits, nuts, and seeds. Humans became more flexible eaters, and that flexibility helped them survive when the giants of the Ice Age vanished. Another adaptation came in how people built their homes. In the coldest parts of the Ice Age, some shelters were made of mammoth bones, covered with hides for insulation. But as forests spread, wood became easier to find. People started constructing huts from logs, branches, and clay. Some settled in caves, but others began to experiment with more permanent homes, a small step toward the villages and towns of the future. The new environment offered new building materials, and humans were quick to make use of them. Clothing, too, had to change. In the harshest cold, thick furs were essential, layered to trap warmth. But as the climate warmed, lighter clothing became practical. People adjusted what they wore to match the seasons, creating garments not just for survival, but for comfort. Animal hides were still important, but woven fibers and plant materials gradually became part of clothing as well. This, too, shows how humans could observe, learn, and innovate. The changing environment also encouraged humans to settle in new places. Coastal areas, once too cold or too dangerous, now offered rich resources: fish, shellfish, and sea mammals. Rivers became lifelines, providing fresh water, food, and travel routes. Fertile valleys that opened up as glaciers retreated became attractive for longer-term living. Some groups stayed mobile, moving with the seasons and the animals. Others began to stay in one place longer, setting the stage for the agricultural revolution that would eventually transform human life. Social structures adapted as well. In smaller, mobile groups, cooperation was key to survival. But as people gathered in larger communities in fertile areas, social roles became more complex. Storytelling, rituals, and traditions evolved too, reflecting the new world people lived in. Myths that once centered on mammoths and icy landscapes shifted toward forests, rivers, and crops. Humans carried their old stories forward but reshaped them to match their surroundings. One of the most important human adaptations was learning to manage and shape the environment itself. Fire, long a friend of survival, became a tool not just for warmth and cooking, but for clearing land and encouraging certain plants to grow. Humans began experimenting with planting seeds and tending wild plants, practices that would, over time, lead to farming. Though agriculture was still far in the future during the last stages of the Ice Age, the first sparks of that idea began to appear. Of course, adaptation was not always easy. Rising seas forced people to abandon lands they had known for generations. As coastlines flooded, some communities were cut off from others. Animals that had been central to survival disappeared, forcing hard choices and moments of hunger. Conflicts may have risen between groups competing for the best lands or the richest resources. Adapting to change is never simple, but it is part of the story of humanity. What makes this period so fascinating is how it shows the resilience of people. The Ice Age could have been the end of humanity, but instead, it became a test. Humans proved they could not only survive in the harshest cold, but also thrive in the warmth that followed. They could invent new tools, change their diet, move to new lands, and find new ways to live together. It was not always easy, but it was enough to carry them forward. When we look back at this time, we can see the roots of who we are today. The ability to adapt, to change with the world around us, has always been one of humanity's greatest strengths. From the frozen tundras to the green valleys that followed, people found ways to keep moving, to keep learning, and to keep building a future. And so, as the Ice Age drew to its close, humans were not just survivors. They were innovators. They carried the memory of the frozen world into a new age, reshaping their lives and laying the foundations for the civilizations yet to come. The end of the Ice Age was not the end of humanity. It was, in many ways, the beginning of everything that followed. When we think about the Ice Age, it is easy to imagine only the cold, the snow, and the struggle to survive. But if we look closer, there are lessons hidden in that frozen chapter of history, lessons that still matter to us today. The Ice Age was not only about glaciers and mammoths. It was about people learning how to adapt, about nature's power to change, and about the ways life endures even in the harshest of times. One of the clearest lessons is about resilience. The Ice Age was long, difficult, and often unforgiving. Yet humans, animals, and plants all found ways to carry on. Mammoths grew thick coats of fur. Reindeer developed adaptations for the cold, and humans learned to make tools and clothing to keep themselves alive. Every living thing adjusted, even when the odds seemed impossible. This reminds us that resilience is at the core of life itself. Even when the world feels overwhelming, life finds a way forward. Another lesson is about adaptation. The world at the end of the Ice Age was not the same as the one at its beginning. Glaciers melted, landscapes changed, and many of the great animals disappeared. But humans did not vanish. Instead, they learned to hunt different prey, gather new plants, build new homes, and live in new places. That willingness to change, to accept the world as it was and find ways to fit within it, was what allowed humanity to survive. It is the same lesson we carry today. Change is inevitable, but those who adapt will endure. The Ice Age also shows us the power of nature. Glaciers carved valleys, shaped rivers, and even created entire lakes. A sheet of ice could reshape a continent. Floods, unleashed by melting glaciers, could sweep across the land in a single day, changing the course of rivers and stripping the ground bare. These forces remind us that nature is vast, powerful, and often beyond our control. It humbles us to remember that the world we live in today was shaped by such power, and it asks us to treat our planet with respect. There is also a lesson in fragility. The great animals of the Ice Age seemed unstoppable. Mammoths roamed in enormous herds, saber-toothed cats were fierce predators, and giant sloths were like walking fortresses. Yet they are gone now, vanished in the blink of an eye when measured against the scale of history. Climate change, human hunting, and shifting landscapes all played their part. Their extinction reminds us that even the mightiest creatures can be vulnerable, and that balance with the environment is delicate. For humans, the Ice Age was also a time of creativity and imagination. In the flicker of firelight, people painted on cave walls, carved figures from bone and ivory, and told stories that gave meaning to the frozen world around them. These acts of expression tell us that even in hard times, humans need beauty, stories, and shared meaning. It was not enough simply to survive. People wanted to understand, to dream, and to leave a mark behind. The lesson here is that the human spirit is not only about survival, but also about seeking connection, purpose, and expression, even when life is difficult. The Ice Age also teaches us about beginnings. It marked the end of one world and the start of another. As glaciers melted and seas rose, new landscapes appeared, and humans began to settle, farm, and build the first steps toward civilization. Without the end of the Ice Age, there would have been no fertile valleys, no rivers as we know them, and perhaps no great civilizations rising where they did. The ending of one era became the foundation for another. The lesson is that endings are not only losses, they can also be opportunities for new beginnings. Perhaps the most important lesson is hope. Imagine living in a world where winters seemed endless, where animals disappeared, and where the land itself changed before your eyes. It would have been easy to despair. And yet, humans kept going. They lit fires, told stories, raised children, and walked into new lands. They believed in tomorrow, even when today was uncertain. That quiet hope carried humanity through the Ice Age, just as it carries us through challenges now. So, when we ask, what caused the Ice Age? We can think about science, about orbital changes, shifting climates, and melting glaciers. But we can also think about what the Ice Age caused in us: resilience, creativity, adaptation, and hope. These are not just scientific answers, but human ones, reflections of how life meets challenge with endurance and imagination. And maybe that is why the Ice Age continues to fascinate us. It is not just a frozen chapter of history, it is a mirror of our own journey. We see in it both the fragility of life and the strength of spirit, both the coldness of the world and the warmth of survival. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, there is always a spark of light, and that spark has carried us all the way to the present. As you drift towards sleep, you might imagine the quiet of an Ice Age night. Snow falling gently, a fire burning low, a small group of humans huddled close telling stories under the stars. Outside, mammoths move slowly across the plains, their shapes dark against the moonlit snow. The world is vast, cold, and uncertain, but inside there is warmth, there is community, and there is hope. That is the true lesson of the Ice Age. No matter how hard the world becomes, life endures, and the spark of humanity keeps burning. And so, our journey through the Ice Age comes to a gentle close. We've seen how glaciers shaped the land, how giant animals rose and fell, and how humans adapted with creativity, courage, and quiet hope. The Ice Age may sound like a time of endless struggle, but it also reminds us of endurance, of life, its ability to survive and even thrive in the harshest of worlds. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all, that change is constant, but so is our strength to face it. Thank you for joining me on this frozen adventure through history. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, so you won't miss more gentle journeys into the past, told slowly and softly to help you rest. Until next time, may the calm of history guide you into peaceful dreams, and may you always find warmth even in the coldest nights.